Let's get started. We're going to make a presentation poster for conferences and so forth with PowerPoint. Now, why would you want to use PowerPoint instead of Adobe InDesign, right? Personally, I would use Adobe InDesign because I've been using InDesign since it was PageMaker well over 20 years ago. But I would say most people know how to use PowerPoint, and PowerPoint does have some features that InDesign doesn't. So one of them being with PowerPoint, they have actual stock images that you can use, which isn't the case with Adobe. University of Miami doesn't subscribe to Adobe stock, so you wouldn't have those images available to you, but PowerPoint does have some. And PowerPoint has pre-designed smart art that can be used as well, and a really good, pretty good, because it works as Excel, graph making feature that you wouldn't get in InDesign either. So most people, when we print conference posters in Creative Studio, they use PowerPoint, and I'm making this video partially for them as well. Since we see some of the issues that come up over and over again, I can always point them to this video. All right, so to get started, let me share my screen. Let me move you guys over to my other window here. Okay, so if you looked at the Word document, step one is actually sketching out your design. That's here you can see little sketching in certain areas. I think it's a better idea than just starting with the blank screen and starting to stick things all over the place. Better to kind of have an idea of what it is that you want to say and where it should go, to flow with, your storyline, whatever you're presenting about. I would also say, Google presentation posters to get some ideas of what you might want yours to look like, color scheme, format, and also most conference posters are pretty much the same size. They're pretty much all landscape. Very rarely do you see them in portrait. And there's certain things that you don't really need to think about, which is the title goes to the top. That's pretty much the way it goes. It's usually centered at the top. And then the introduction or the abstract is usually at the top left-hand corner. And then your conclusion and references are usually at the bottom right. So right there, you've already got part of your poster design set, no problem. Okay, so when you open up PowerPoint, you do have several options as far as, maybe templates and so forth. You really only use one slide. That's the poster. So you kind of have set up, you would set up whatever template, just the blank version of it. So I am a big fan of having off-white background as opposed to all white, and not really having a gradient, but depending on the gradient, some gradients can look good. And then, once you pick, it doesn't really necessarily matter if you're picking a solid color. You can go to the design tab and then the format background, and then solid, gradient, and so forth. As I mentioned, I don't particularly like white. It's just too stark. But if you like white, that's perfectly fine. White is a good way to save me ink downstairs when I'm printing all these posters. I just think that the off-white is a little bit easier on the eyes. There's also scientific posters in PowerPoint already that you can download off the web. This site, Make Signs, has some really nice templates that you can use. You'll find that most of these are really, really similar. They're all the title at the top with 4 columns. That's kind of the way they are. But there's other websites if you wanted to do 3 columns. There's a way to adjust these to have just 3 columns instead. You can see this one over here has just 3 columns, the 2 small ones on each side and then the one in the middle. But I did download one of these so you could see it. And you can see it's really, really kind of just nice and all set up for you. You just, transfer in the actual title, you bring in your own things. If you need to bring these down, to make it fit your area, then you can do that. I do recommend them. They're really nice. Now let me go to my big slide here. So this is like the most important part here. I'm going to talk about is the resizing. So once you have your slide down, whichever it is, in the design tab, there's a feature here called slide size. Now, when we get these posters, most people haven't done this part, and they just bring in a poster that's for 3, which is roughly a letter-sized sheet of paper. You know, it's not very big, and then they want it to be the standard size for conference posters, which is 3 by 4 feet. So very, very big difference. So you would go to page setup, and then you can custom size to 48 by 36. That will give you, just to make sure that you have your slide and everything set at exactly the way you need it. Now you can start off in standard format if you're going to be printing something that's 36 by 48 specifically, because it's kind of a 1-to-1 ratio. It blows up exactly correctly without anything really left over, and it's perfectly fine. The only problem is we really do need it resized to 36 by 48 before we get it, because what happens is the images get messed up. Now I have examples. So I'm going to go to Photoshop here. So this slide is 36, well, it was standard size. So standard size translates into, let me go back to where I opened it. There we go. Standard is 10 by 7.5 at 300 DPI. That's the ideal resolution. So when people want us to blow it up to the 48, the resolution goes down to 62. Now the threshold for websites is 72. For printing, I don't usually like to go to 125. So right here, I know I'm going to have problems. If I go ahead and do it at, you know, leave it at 300 at 48 by 36, everything starts to get a little bit fuzzy. Now, most people don't seem to mind this. As a graphic designer, it does kind of irk me, and I'm just like, I can see that it's not clear. And if they had just resized it in PowerPoint, even at the very end, at least the letters would be clear. But this is what happens. And so, yes, I can blow it up to 36 by 48. Photoshop decides to invent pixels for me. Everything looks more or less fine, except the images. So depending on how well your image was in PowerPoint, just the size of the original image itself, it might or might not blow up okay. This is an exaggeration of how awful it can be, but it has been the case where people will put in images into their 7 by 10 and it just does not blow up well. So here's another example. This is a slide that was not a standard, it's at widescreen, which is 16 by 9. And that is 7.5 by 13, 300 DPI. I'll spare you that part. Let's say I'm just going to go to 48. Now at 48 by 27. So I don't reach the 36, but if I go to 36 and it's 64, now it's too big. So let's do 48. Okay. But, you know, they need it to be 36. So we go ahead and fine, we'll make it 36. But now you have all this extra space. So if you didn't create the poster at the correct size, at either standard or the actual size you needed, which is I recommend, because again, not everybody needs the 36 by 48. What you have is almost a foot of empty space here when we print it that could have been information. It could have, you know, rounded out your presentation. It could have been a larger point size to help, you know, people read it. It could have been larger graphs. It could have been more images. It's just completely lost. So let's go back to my 36 by 48. I showed you everything that happens if someone sends the PDF. Here. Okay, so the next part I was going to talk about is adding elements now. Let me give this a better background. There, that's more readable. Okay. So the composition, aligning features, and so forth. One of the things that PowerPoint has is under View, you can look at the rulers and guides. Let me fit to window. There we go. All right, so I have my ruler up here. I've already set this, you know, at the size that I needed. And I have these guides that I can right click and add more. But I've set this, if you want to do the math, to make it a 3-column poster and make everything pretty much an equal size. I can usually eyeball it and then I check with my guides later. And you can, like I mentioned, you could add another guide if you wanted to make this 4 columns instead of 3 columns. Oh, I pressed the wrong. There we go. But this way, again, I know everything is more or less the same size. I always recommend that everything should be at least a little, like a pica, which is about a 6, no, it's like a 6 or an 1/8 of an inch away from everything. It's basically this is between this guide and this picture, away from each other. You don't really want this to be on here because then this will technically be a smaller column than the one next to it. You don't want everything to be on top of each other. If everybody's been to my graphic design crash course, it should be pretty much in the middle. Now, as I do this, you can see these other little guides come up because PowerPoint, just like InDesign, wants to help you make sure that everything is aligned. So I can move these little areas and it'll tell me that there's that line to make sure that everything's lined up right. So it's pretty easy to keep everything lined up. We want this imaginary line here at the top. So I want to make sure that all my text is more or less lined up. There it is. There's the line. Make sure everything is down here. I can make sure this is centered. You see how the little red line comes up. So that makes your presentation look really organized and nice and neat, even though there's no actual line that's showing there. Like visually, your brain kind of just sees it. If you're Windows. Oh yeah, if you're using PowerPoint on Windows, there's another option here for grid, and that's how you can really set the pica difference. Unfortunately, I'm doing this presentation today in Mac. This version of PowerPoint doesn't have grids, but if you pull up the grid, it'll have a whole bunch of little squares. You can actually select to have the squares at 6 of an inch, and that'll let you know exactly how much a pica is and how far away to keep everything. So text boxes, I mean, everything else is pretty simple in that way. You know how to add text. Let me get out of the, no. That is not what I meant to do. That's what I meant to do. Okay, yeah, so insert text boxes, you guys know all about that. For a poster that's going to be printed, this is all of the idea that is going to be printed out somewhere. 16 points is the smallest point size that you want and still be ADA compliant. It's what we use the Creative Studio for all the text that's going on the wall. And I've heard from Jose that's as small as you want to make it as well. So this one here, this little tiny caption that I have under the image is actually 28 points. I could go smaller, but that's where I have it there. It's not a lot of information on this fake conference poster that I made, but just keep that in mind, 16 points being the smallest. Another thing you want to do is be completely consistent. So all the text and what we call the body text like should be the same size to each other. So all my subtitles are going to be at 48. All my body text is also 48. Okay, but I could have made a different size. But if I change this to 32, then I want to change this one down here to 32. A lot of times what I see is people have more information over here than they do over here. So the font over here will be slightly larger, and I can really tell it should all be the same size to each other. That helps with the consistency of it. The subtitles or the headers, if you want to call them that, should be, if not larger, then distinctive. I have it here both at 48, but that's because I have it as a different color and I have it all caps and, do I have it bold? I don't have it bold. The caps and the color was enough to really make it stand out from the rest of the body copy that's down here. The subtitle should be, if you have a subtitle, you don't have to have one, should be distinctive from the title. So they don't look like it's just one long sentence. Yeah, and every little section should have its own title, including any graphs or charts. You might need a sentence to describe, to fully explain what the chart that you're showing is, but you don't want the chart just hanging in there. And that's something that I used to see with some of my students when I would teach infographics, is that they would add the chart and they thought it was self-explanatory. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Like, what is this information you're giving me here? So make sure that, every graph and so forth has a subtitle as well. Images and shapes. Okay, so as I mentioned before, PowerPoint does have some stock images. So if I go to insert pictures, stock images, or at least the PowerPoint version that University of Miami gave us. And I will pull up this one by showing Office. So it's a pretty big image. So what you want to do when you add images and you need to resize, do it by the corners and then it'll remain proportional. If you do it by the sides, you might accidentally do this, and that's bad. If the image is bigger than the size you need, you can crop in Photoshop. So no worries about having to open up Adobe. You'll notice that I did crop this image from over here. So once I have the image selected, if I'm under picture format already, if not, go to picture format, there's a crop feature right here that will just let you squeeze in the area, and then you can have the image be the exact size you need, and doing that without making the image disproportioned, which I also see a lot, which people like, I have this much space, let me just do this so it fits there. I can tell. Right. Cropping, resizing, adding smart art. Yeah, that's another great thing about PowerPoint, is all the smart art options that are here that, if I was doing this in InDesign or Illustrator, I would have to just create all of these from scratch. But you can just, pick one here. You saw me choosing hierarchy. And if you're familiar with PowerPoint, you can just edit these as you need them to be. Just remember also, when you're writing any text, you want to make sure that all the fonts are the same. No poster should have more than 3 fonts. The title can be a nice big fun font. The subtitles can also be a little bit distinctive. The body text should all be a normal brand, run-of-the-mill font, like Arial, Calibri, Garamond, Verdana, Times New Roman. It's perfect. No fancy font for the rest of the poster. But yeah, smart art is a great one. And then, as you know, the charts that you can have, and they work with Excel. So however well Excel is however well these are going to come out. And then as you click on them here, you can also change the text to each graph to, again, match the fonts in the rest of the poster. There are color options if you don't like that color. Usually the color options are going to be something related to whatever theme you chose at the beginning, if you did choose a theme. If you didn't choose a theme, then Microsoft is the theme in itself, and these color options will be different depending on what theme I started with. But it is possible to be slightly different. That blends way too much into the background. And then technically I can actually change each one of these myself if I want to. So I wouldn't say that's not usually recommended. I mean, they've chosen the colors to kind of match the theme. I've already gone off theme by choosing this background color. But yeah, if I select each bar, you can see once I click one, the corresponding bar in each section also gets selected. I can go ahead, and if I'm under chart design, I can go ahead and change that to whatever color, I need it to be. I wouldn't choose red there, but, I'm just illustrating a point. And yes, you can use the gradient fill. There's a lot of options here, again, that InDesign wouldn't give you. And this is really the advantage of PowerPoint. and probably why a lot of conference posters are made with PowerPoint that we print out. And then for printing, if it's for us, export it at to PDF. That's the way we would use it. So now let me, I have one here, do I? Yes. Okay. So here's an example going back to the resizing. If you have started off in standard and wanted, or in this case, widescreen, and wanted to change the size later, because what happens is when you work in something that really large, like the 36 by 48, you're going to end up zooming in and out a lot because the poster is just so big. So you could theoretically start at one of these and move up, but this is what's going to happen. So with the widescreen specifically, the widescreen, I need this to be the 36 by 48. Okay, so you are converting to a larger size. Do you want to scale content up? The answer is yes, because if you don't, it's going to stay at whatever small font size in a giant sheet of paper, as you can see. So we don't want that. We're going to go to 8, 36. Do I want to scale up? Yes. And then here is what happens. It's the same thing that happened in the Photoshop section that I showed you. You have all this extra space. Now you're going to have to adjust everything basically to fit this correctly. But another thing that I want you to do, if you do that, is down here where it says, you know, what the viewing percentage is. I want you to make sure that you view it at 100% to make sure that all the images do hold up. Because you remember that one image that I showed you before that it didn't hold up, but this is a good image. I got it from PowerPoint, so this image holds up no problem. But the reason I want everybody to size up before they give us the PDF is because when you size up the PowerPoint from your PowerPoint, it sizes up the text. So now the text is beautifully sharp. None of that fuzzy pixelated stuff that, you know, we see downstairs a lot. If you do it this way, only the images have the, you know, the problem of maybe being pixelated, but the text just, it's no problem. And the graphs are no problem either because it was all generated by PowerPoint. So these are all going to be really nice and sharp also. Do I have the other one here? No, I don't. Yes, I do. Okay, so here is the one that is made it standard. I'm gonna bring that one up. And then you can see the text is really nice and sharp. You know, it sized it up perfectly, 100% there. And then I can see right there that that image isn't going to work. So I can go ahead and find another image that is going to work at that size and not worry about the rest. I still recommend you just work at the size. But if you are making a 36 by 48, you can start in standard and then size up. They just, they're perfectly aligned. All right, so now let me show you some bad examples of, well, they're all bad. I'll show you some examples of conference posters. All right, so here is, I mean, this one's totally nice. It's a little bit bland, I guess. It's the white background, but I mean, it's readable. You got the 4 columns, you have the title at the top. Just from a graphic design point of view, the charts are these blue and oranges, which are complementary on the color wheel. So they really stand out from each other. Everything is bullet points, maybe a little excessive, but bullet points are a really good way of breaking up too much text. And then I don't know how well these would read at the size that it would be printed at, but everything else looks, you know, pretty good. In contrast, so here is, it's not necessarily that's anything wrong, but I'll start with the color. The background color is just way too bright. You know, it is readable. and so forth, but it's just way too much on the eyes. And then black and red together, that's little box over here, it's usually not recommended, especially, you know, in printing or in web, having black on red or red letters on black. And I don't really know where the blue is coming from, this bright blue, because all the charts are this dark blue and red and white. So they just kind of chose this random blue. There is a lot of text. I would probably, you know, break that up a bit. And then the charts, they just kind of look shoved in there. I don't know if you're getting that. And some of that is because they're not enough picas apart, especially like here in discussion, the text is going right up to that chart. And over here in intervention either. That's why everything I should say should be that 1 pica, 1/6 of an inch away from everything else. And then you'll notice that over here in the middle, they had way too much text, so they shrunk it. You can see it's way smaller than the rest of it. So this has some issues that could have, you know, been worked on. Excuse me. All right, this one. It's not terrible. The title has a stroke, which I also don't recommend. A stroke is when they have the black outline on the letters. In this case, my guess is the pink was not really reading much from the background. So they added this stroke to make it stand out. But I can tell when people do that. So I prefer if the words can just stand on their own without having a stroke on them. Now the boxes here are, I have no problem with boxes per se, but in this case what the boxes created is this empty space. I don't know what they could have filled it up with, some more information, maybe I don't know, something, but you can see the empty spaces and you kind of just feel them. If I was doing this, if I was grading this for my class, I would put a little for rent sign down here. I'm sure my students really got annoyed by that, but that's what I would do. And then the boxes aren't equidistant from each other. Like we have this nice column here and it's probably the same over here, but then over here it looks like slightly smaller, and then over here it's even smaller, just because they were trying to fit more information into places. The boxes here are aligned, but they're not aligned with this logo, so it just kind of bleeds over into this space, which makes you think, well, the boxes could have been bigger. There could have been more information here. Okay, this one's probably my least favorite. This is, I'm just going to say it's over-designed. So I'm not really a huge fan of giant boxes with rounded edges. There's just a lot of them here, and what it does is it doesn't really allow for certain things to be written. So for example, it looks fine up here because the introduction is small, but then over here you just kind of run out of space. So now you have this big empty space down here. My recommendation would probably just be to only have the top part rounded, and I have an example of that next. And then that would mean you have the actual space here to keep writing instead of just, you know, kind of giving up. And then on top of that, you have these two background colors, the blue over here and then the gray over here. And the rounded corners just give you all this extra space for no reason. The boxes are also lined in the purple. And then you have these two little graphs here. You know, you think maybe if they designed this differently, we could, you know, maybe see those better. And then the acknowledgements down here is just a smaller box. It doesn't align with everything else. So it's over designed, and those rounded edges were unnecessary. All right, so here's an example of where that would kind of work. As you can see here, the rounded edges aren't as rounded, I suppose, and it only goes at the top. So it goes at the top here, and then it goes at the bottom here. So it's like this cute little, like, you know, hamburger-esque kind of design. But, you know, it's darker green because it's just giving you a different point. All this other superfluous information they have to add is at the bottom. I do think it's a little bit too plain background white as far as the white over here and then the white back here. Maybe the flowers could have been a green or something, or a very light background color behind the boxes might have helped to stand out more. I also think that everything here in the middle with the graphs is a little bit hard to read. They're kind of just all shoved into their space. It's kind of hard to figure out where your eye is supposed to go first and in what order you're supposed to be looking at these. And sometimes which text belongs with which graph. And I would say that part of that is because they're not really aligned with each other. You know, it's not creating these visual boxes that everything else is creating to help you kind of differentiate. Like here's one column over here, and then here is this, but this has little arrows over here. So it's this and this, and then is this part of this? And then is this circle go with this text? Because the little title here is moving into the territory of this circle, but I'm not sure they really have anything to do with each other. So yeah, that's the problem. And this is why if you're not aligning things to each other, you can get messy and it's a little hard to read. So here's some boxes. Again, I don't have a problem with boxes. This also has stroke on the setting up an academic makerspace. They wouldn't have had to use stroke if they had set up their text fonts a little bit differently. This one is really annoying because it's smaller, so the stroke is more noticeable. A different font would have probably just alleviated that. The title here is way too close to the edge. It's not aligned with the rest of the text. And then honestly, the step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, because they're centered and they just don't really stand out enough from the rest of the text. I know I'm pretty sure it's dark blue. But because everything is over here, you're kind of reading step 1, you're reading this in this diagonal that's kind of tiring on the eyes. So I would probably put the steps just aligned left with everything else. I'm not saying centering is bad. I'm saying in this case, centering was bad. The centering isn't bad here in this second column. It works pretty well, but it's just not working here on the left. The text is too close here to the bottom. They're just kind of shoved it in there. I'm not sure why they put this text right aligned. They should have left aligned it and then put that green over there. But you know, I'm being nitpicky. Those are just small things that could have been fixed to, you know, help this design overall. But overall, it's not bad. Yeah, sorry about this being blurry, but here's just the standard one. There is a lot of information here, but I think the bullet points help. And I do want to mention that because that's another infographic issue that I've seen where in conference poster where there's just so much text, and I've told students straight out, no one's going to want to read that like at all. You know, the introduction, okay, yes, the introduction is a really good place to have just a straight paragraph, but you know, most areas you need the bullet points to really make everything stand out and make it easily digestible chunks. And then I have some really bad examples of gradients here, just because I normally tell people to stay away from gradients until they're a more experienced designer. The first template that I showed you had the gradient where the blue was coming down from the bottom and then just slowly turning into white when it got to the top. And that's the way to do it, because in this case, it just makes it kind of top heavy. It looks like it's just kind of like, I don't know. Yeah, top heavy is really the best word for it. You want the color going the other way. This looks like a spotlight. It's just been shined in the middle. And here's a good example of some, you know, too much text. And then the purple, because the purple is so dark in one area and then it's going to the other, you'll notice that the column on the right is way easier to read because the purple isn't so heavy, but it just makes it so noticeable that the column on the left is more difficult to read. That's where the font probably should have been white, but you don't want the font to be white over here and then, you know, it to be black over there. So they probably should have just made it a lighter purple gradient all throughout. And I personally wouldn't do a gradient from left to right unless the story that I'm trying to tell went, you know, from left to right, which in a conference poster like this is usually the case. Right, so that is it for my bad gradients. And that is honestly it for me. Do I have anything else down here? No? Okay. going to stop sharing. I'm going to see, I saw some, is there an average limit on charts? No, I've seen very chart heavy conferences. It really depends how much you want to say. I wouldn't say there's a limit at all. I mean, if it's 50-50, I think that's totally fine. But I mean, if your conference poster is, a study that you made and you want to show all the different the data points of it, I don't see why it would be a problem if you have more charts than you do text, because if you want people to analyze the data from themselves, maybe you want to show the data, and that's just the conference paper, your poster, your presentation might be something else. So no, I wouldn't say that. Do I recommend QR codes in posters? Within the poster, probably not. Maybe next to it. Why? Well, because the poster doesn't really go anywhere else except with you. That's it if you're at a conference. If you're at a conference, then you usually have a space to put the QR code somewhere else. It's great to have a QR code to get people more information, and I think it's better overall than handing out sheets of paper with more information. But perhaps, I guess, if the conference poster was going in a place where it was just going to be there and for a while, then maybe that would be the case, because how else are people going to find more information of it? Generally speaking, I haven't seen that much. I've only seen it in front of the poster or like tacked next to it. But yes, but we don't really get that downstairs. Yes, every semester you'll see a bunch of students sitting on the floor taping sheets of paper together. Yes, so we actually give that advice also at the Creative Studio. Some people don't want to pay the money for the poster, and that's fine. I understand, if the professor doesn't mind. We do tell students how they can print their gigantic poster in several 8.5 by 11 sheets on the Canon printers, and they will sit there and tape it together. But yeah, we do teach them how to do that. We understand. We're not trying to take your money or anything. Okay. Any other questions or comments? No? Okay, well, like I mentioned, this is being recorded. We're going to have it on the Creative Studio workshop. The link to the instruction sheet that I sent you, I'm going to formalize that a bit, maybe add some screenshots, and that will go on the Creative Studio workshop as well. So you'll always have access to this, and pass it around, please. We would love to see more posters where we don't have to keep calling professors and telling them that their photos are too low res. I will probably ask them to edit out that last part of this video. Okay, thank you guys.